Hey, today we're going to talk about 8.15, pathogens and infectious diseases. So before we begin, you can check out the Enduring Understanding, look at the learning objective, squint your eyes, and look at all of these essential knowledge as you set up your Cornell notes. So when we're talking about pathogens and infectious diseases, one of the major contributor is, especially with infectious diseases, is density dependency. So if people are in close proximity to one another, there will be a higher likelihood that diseases will spread. Now, poverty is a major indicator for spread of diseases because there is a lack of proper sanitation, medical assistance, and basic sanitation. And if you notice, a lot of these images are taken from slums around the world, and a lot of waterborne illnesses occur, and there's also a lot of diseases that can spread from basic sewage contamination. Other factors, global warming is another issue, especially when we have, if you notice in the tropics, there's a lot of different insects can survive the entire year, so there's a lot more instances of diseases that are spread by flies, by mosquitoes, and by other insects. In fact, what you might not know is cockroaches are originally tropical. The only reason we have cockroaches up in, at least this far up in latitude, is because we have home heating. Cockroaches would not survive in New York in the winter, but because we have heating in our homes, that's why cockroaches survive up here. But with global warming, organisms and insects like mosquitoes will be able to migrate farther north and farther south into areas where they could not survive over the winter. So their ranges will spread, expand, and they will serve as vectors for diseases. Now, what is another issue is the travel, and we have seen this most recently with the COVID, and the disease spread all around the world at a really rapid rate. Once it hit New York, it basically started going in every single city, and then it was a global pandemic. So we have vector-borne diseases, and a vector is basically an insect that or an animal that spreads a pathogen. A pathogen is something that is a living organism, or an organism basically that contains DNA and can transmit or cause a disease in a host. Now, with malaria, the pathogen is a protozoan. Protozoans are microscopic organisms. They're sort of like bacteria. They're a completely different kingdom of organisms. Sorry, they're not animals, but they are microscopic. That's not really what it looks like. That's just an emoji. But the vector, or the animal that spreads this disease, is a mosquito. And countries that have high rates of malaria are shown here in this map. And predominantly sub-Saharan Africa, also Southeast Asia. These are a lot of the countries that when you travel to these countries, you will need to take a malaria shot. And this is something that is very common, but it is preventable. But it is very common in these countries, and it is preventable with a vaccination, which is not easily attainable because of the rates of poverty in a lot of these countries. Symptoms, there can be flu-like symptoms, but eventually leading to seizures and coma. And once that happens, you could die. A lot of the people that die from this are younger children and people who are in poor health to begin with. Another vector-borne disease is the West Nile virus. It is spread by a virus. It is caused by a virus. It is spread, the vector is a mosquito. And you've probably heard about the West Nile virus. It appeared in New York over the last 20 years, and now it's spread. I just saw something recently that it made its way over to California from West Nile. So it went over the Atlantic Ocean, and then now it's through the United States as well. Symptoms, Fever, headache, rash. Eventually, if it's untreated or it becomes severe, it can lead to brain inflammation, which is potentially fatal. Another vector-borne disease is the plague, bubonic plague, Black Death. This is the same disease that infected a good portion of the planet back in the Middle Ages. It is spread by a bacteria it is caused by a bacteria, and the vector is a flea, which is the organism that holds the bacteria, but the fleas hitch a ride on rats. So if you have rats, they're probably flea infested and they could be infected with the plague. Now this is like an image that was shown a lot. In fact, this is what they used to wear in the Middle Ages, and this was to protect them, but also they would put aromatic, like nice smelling flowers, because there was a lot of stench that was associated with this. Now, this plague is treatable by most antibiotics, but there still are cases that occurs around the planet. Some of the symptoms are fever, chills, muscle aches. It affects the lymph nodes, which are here. You got some here. It affects the lungs. Okay, another vector-borne disease is the Zika virus, and you've probably heard about the Zika virus at least over the last few years, because it is shown up and very common in Central and South America, and it has been advised that pregnant women do not go down to Central or South America for travel, because if they are pregnant and they get bit by the Zika or by a mosquito, which is the vector, they can it can transmit the Zika virus. And it doesn't really give a lot of symptoms to adults. However, if you do get a symptom, you could have a fever, a headache, maybe a rash at the site of the bite. But your child could be, if you were pregnant, your child could be infected with microcephaly, and that's not really infected, but it is a genetic disorder where basically the head, if you see micro means small, CEPH, ceph, that refers to the head. So the skull is less developed, and it results in a smaller skull and a smaller brain. And this is obviously untreatable because it is genetic. So it is preventable. Just avoid places where you may encounter Zika. Another vector-borne disease is Lyme disease. Lyme disease is caused by a bacteria and spread by a deer tick. And deer tick are very small, and they're found a lot. I know you can find deer ticks in Prospect Park. You can find deer ticks in any wooded areas. Dogs can pick them up as well. That's why you have to give them flea and tick medication. But it's very easy to see. If you see a tick, you can examine your legs. You can wear insect repellent, but examine your legs. Wear long pants if you're going out hiking. Examine your legs when you get home and pick off any ticks. They are small, but they're still visible, easily visible by the naked eye. Some of the symptoms, you can have fatigue, body ache, headache, and then it can also lead to long-term chronic effects as well. But this is a telltale sign of a deer tick bite. Another vector-borne disease is MERS, and that's Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, and it is caused by a virus. You'll notice that these little pictures, you've probably seen some things that look like that. The vector is a camel, but they can also be spread from human to human, as shown in this diagram. It is flu-like symptoms, and it is also similar to COVID because this is a coronavirus. So it is similar to COVID-19, and the symptoms are comparable. And of course, they're all flu related. Another infectious disease. Now this is SARS, and SARS kind of came into the news over the last 15 years. Severe acute respiratory syndrome. It is a virus, and it is spread by saliva droplets. Very much like COVID. In fact, this is the virus that was discovered, and over the last 10-15 years, Scientists have been working on a vaccine, which is why the COVID vaccine came out so rapidly, because the research was already done using a SARS virus, which is very similar to the coronavirus, or the coronavirus that causes COVID. This is also a coronavirus. Tuberculosis is another infectious disease. It is very common, not very common, but it is more common in the developing world, and it is a contributing cause of death in the developing world. It is caused by a bacteria and spread by droplets of saliva or even droplets of blood. Now, why is there droplets of blood? Because it affects the lungs, and eventually you will cough up blood. So if you cough blood on another person, you could spread the disease, especially if they inhale it. Another infectious disease is cholera, and cholera was common in the United States. It's not as common anymore. It is common in the developing world, especially where there is not adequate clean water. And it is caused by a bacteria. It is spread by contaminated water. And some of the symptoms are diarrhea and vomiting, and eventually leading to dehydration. If the dehydration goes unchecked, it can cause death. Now, this is a diagram that shows it's like a positive feedback loop. So you have bacteria that exists in the water, and you add these nutrients, these limiting nutrients like nitrates and phosphates. The population can grow. It can easily spread to fruit, drinking water, and it can be in feces. If that is consumed by a person, it goes through their digestive system and it can go back into the water. So this is because of poor sanitation and poor hygiene, things of that nature. So, just gave you a bunch of information. You're going to take a moment, look at this map. It says the share of the population with access to improved drinking water, and this is from 2015. So I would like you to make a claim about an area with high rates of cholera and justify your response with information from this map. So I hope that this video was informative. I thank you for your attention. I will see you soon.